Today's guest has had an extensive journey with Cushing's and Addison's disease. We've learned a bit about Addison's in previous episodes. If you've missed them, be sure to at least check out my interview with Dr. Abraham for a bit more background. Cushing's, on the other hand, is another type of adrenal disease. Cushing syndrome is caused by an excess of cortisol production or by excessive use of cortisol or other similar steroid glucocorticoid hormones. When too much cortisol is produced in the adrenal glands or an excess is taken in treating other diseases, significant changes occur in all of the tissues and organs of the body. All of these affected together are called Cushing syndrome. Cushing's disease is the name given to a type of Cushing syndrome caused by too much production of ACTH in the pituitary. Here are some of the causes of Cushing syndrome. When cortisol or other glucocorticoid hormones are taken in excess of the normal daily requirement for a prolonged period of time, for example, in the treatment of certain life-threatening illnesses. Another cause is spontaneous overproduction of cortisol in the adrenals, which is divided into two groups. Those due to an excess of ACTH, Cushing's disease, most commonly, a pituitary tumor producing too much ACTH, stimulating the adrenals to grow hyperplasia and to produce too much cortisol. Or those that are independent of ACTH, ectopic ACTH production, which happens outside of the pituitary in a benign or malignant tumor, in a lung, thymus gland, pancreas, or other organ. Other causes of Cushing syndrome include a tumor of the adrenal gland itself, not dependent on ACTH. The tumor makes cortisol on its own, and the other adrenal gland shrinks due to the lower ACTH production. Or benign, an adenoma, or malignant, a carcinoma, usually found on only one side. Or a very rare type, multiple benign adenomas on both sides. The inherited form is called Carney complex. Although almost all types of spontaneous Cushing syndrome are ultimately caused by one type of tumor or another, little is known about what makes these tumors occur. Aside from the genetic cause of Carney complex, we still have limited understanding about the factors that cause most forms of Cushing syndrome. With that bit of background on Cushing's, I'd love to finally introduce today's guest, Wendy Moses. Wendy brings honesty, insight, and deep compassion to a journey that's often misunderstood. She has experienced the full spectrum of what it means to have a body in crisis, from the intensity of high cortisol to the daily demands of living without it. Her story is one of hope, identity shifts, and learning to rebuild life on new terms. She has navigated the complexities of life with a chronic condition, including the physical challenges, emotional stamina, and resilience it takes to keep showing up. Whether she is writing, speaking, or just listening, she creates space for people to find beauty, even in the hard spaces. She's passionate about raising awareness, building community, and reminding others there is space for connection, joy, and purpose, even in rare and chronic illness. She's volunteered for multiple organizations, including the Make-A-Wish Foundation, Cushing Support and Research Foundation, and Disability Book Week. She's a disability advocate and 3-time author who was first diagnosed with Cushing's and now lives with Addison's and other rare and chronic illnesses. It's my pleasure to officially welcome Wendy.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
I am so deeply excited. Wendy and I just recently were connected, and now we are probably texting weekly, regularly, all the funny
Yes.
adrenal memes here and there.
Yes.
So I'm super happy that Wendy's decided to come on because she has quite a story. So actually, with that, your journey with adrenal disease has been from one spectrum to the other. Can you share with us exactly how everything really started for you?
Yeah, so it all kind of began when I was 7 years old, 7 or 8, and I was at a family reunion. So I was seeing family who I hadn't seen in, a year or two. And they commented to my parents that I had kind of started to put on weight. And that was kind of the thing that caught their attention first. But they also noted a personality change. I had always kind of been like a really spunky kid, super adventurous, independent. I like to do things my own way and in my own time. And then all of a sudden, I had become this kid who never left her mother's side, never really spoke. I was just kind of always sitting in the corner, not doing anything, not very involved. And so they mentioned this to my parents, and my parents did some research and learned that sometimes these kinds of symptoms can precede a growth spurt. And so they decided to wait a couple of years, knowing that I was kind of starting to maybe hit the beginning of puberty. And so they said, we'll wait, maybe your body will kind of like even itself out, and maybe that's what's causing this. And so we waited until 2009, so I was 10 years old, and all of my symptoms had gotten worse. Like, I was very obese, I had stopped growing, and I also had other symptoms like headache, insomnia, muscle pain, weakness, this appetite. I could eat literally anything and never get full. I was always hungry, starving all the time. And so that's when, being 10 years old, my parents were like, okay, like if something needs to change, it needs to change soon. And so I went to my doctor, and she actually diagnosed me with hypercortisolism, or too much cortisol, my first appointment. She was like, I'm 99% sure that this is what you have. And so I learned that in itself is kind of a miracle, because I know some people who go from doctor to doctor to doctor, and they spend years trying to figure out what's wrong. And here my doctor figured it out the first visit. So I had all of the normal tests, and they found an adenoma next to my pituitary gland, and I had surgery to take that out. And a few days after surgery, we found out that surgery wasn't successful. My cortisol levels were still sky high. And I was already a rare enough patient being a kid with Cushing's, but then me not responding to the surgery, nobody really knew what to do with me. So I was referred to the National Institutes of Health in Maryland, which is a government-run research facility. So essentially, they have the best doctors and the best tests, all of the latest technology at their fingertips. And so I was referred there, and during my visit, they found a tumor in my pancreas. And they did some more testing, and they said, yes, like, we're sure this is causing your Cushing's. So 6 months after my original surgery, I had another surgery on my pancreas to remove this tumor. And I will never forget, like, 3 days later, the nurse walking into my hospital room and saying, because surgery didn't work, blah, blah, blah. And she had thought that we had already been told that the second surgery was unsuccessful. There was just some miscommunication there, but that was just like absolutely devastating for me and also my family. I lived in Michigan at the time, and here we were hundreds of miles away, and even the best doctors in the world couldn't figure out how to fix me and how to help me feel better. So they did additional testing on the tumor that they had removed, and they found that it is something called a neuroendocrine tumor. And it's called that because basically these tumor cells have a lot of the same, oh my gosh, I cannot think of the word. These tumor cells have a lot of the same characteristics as like nerves or endocrine cells. And they said, it's a super rare kind of cancer. Normally when we find it, it's in like 40, 50, 60-year-old people. And here you are, you're 11 years old, and you already have this. And so they did genetic testing, and they found that I have a genetic abnormality in the part of my DNA that helps fight tumors of the endocrine system. And that's called multiple endocrine neoplasia, or just MEN. And so the genetic abnormality kind of triggered this neuroendocrine tumor in both my pituitary and my pancreas, which had kind of caused this little like rabbit trail that doctors kept thinking were the cause of my Cushing's and weren't. Um, and so then we entered the summer of 2010, and doctors basically told my parents that I was too sick. The Cushing's had done too much damage to my body. There was no treatment for this cancer. And so they said, just kind of try to keep Wendy comfortable. She probably has about 6 months left.
Oh my gosh.
And so we went home. I don't really remember that summer, except for just being in pain all the time. It's just one big, foggy, painful memory. And then 5, 6 months later, so this is when doctors were saying that it was going to be the end. We traveled back to the NIH, just kind of as like another follow-up. And we got there, we had my first appointment with my doctors, and they said, we're doing surgery tomorrow to take out your adrenal glands. Because even though the problem isn't with your adrenal glands, if we can stop your body from producing this cortisol, maybe you're still just barely healthy enough to recover from that, and we can address the other issues, such as the tumors later. But we won't have a chance to even get there if the cortisol kills you first. And so then 1 year after my first surgery, I had my third to remove both of my adrenal glands. And just like I'll never forget when the nurse walked in and said, surgery didn't work, I will also never forget when my doctor walked in and he's like showing all of his students, like, look at how her eyes are clear and her cheeks are no longer flushed and she's sitting up and like she's communicating well. And so 2 weeks after that surgery, we got like the official test results that said that I no longer had Cushing's.
Oh my gosh. Well, first off, I'm so sorry that you had to go through this. That's, no one should have to go through this dramatic change and deterioration of their body, let alone at such a young age when you're just trying to be a human and have fun. And I'm so sorry that you and your family had to travel. We hear this all the time, great distances. I've experienced this. Like, you have to travel far to get the proper treatment. But I'm so glad that you went back and that this doctor said, we're getting on the surgery table tomorrow. We're going to do this. And you had that transition from, it's opposite sides, from Cushing's to Addison's. Now, I'm curious because a lot of people in our community, who have Cushing's, their doctors are pushing surgery. They get quite a bit of time to think about it, do the pros and cons, really consider things. You didn't really get that choice. You probably didn't even know what Addison's was, especially at that age. But even your family, like, I'm sure there wasn't much time to really consider. What was that like to go from, ultimately you had no choice, but to go from these Cushing symptoms, which were literally killing you, to the opposite side of dealing with Addison's?
I think the biggest thing was that you can control Addison's. And my Cushing's was just, my cortisol levels were off the charts and I was so, so miserable. I couldn't function. And so, yeah, we were kind of thrust into this, like, oh, we're having surgery tomorrow. We'll kind of catch up and deal with everything else later. And I remember before I got discharged from the hospital, a doctor and a nurse sitting down with me and, explaining Cortef dosing and updosing for when you're sick and everything like that, and the emergency injection. And yes, it was very overwhelming, but it was also like, oh, now I have rules I can follow and I have guidelines that will help. And with Cushing's, I was having to like block out all of my symptoms just to exist. I couldn't sit there and be like, oh, my head hurts and my stomach hurts and I can't move. With Addison's, it's like I can listen to my body and I'm like, oh, if I don't feel good, that just means I need extra Cortef. And I can work with my body and help it function better instead of like just trying to live despite my body or, even like fighting against my body.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's you're working with it versus against it. It was out of your control. At least that's what it sounds like you're saying. It was out of your control with Cushing's.
Yes.
And then the shift to Addison's was that you had tools, you had resources, you had guidelines. There was a plan of action.
Right. Yes, exactly.
What was that like for you and your family? Was that just, you were given this make her comfortable, enjoy the end kind of thing. And now you have this, oh, wait, maybe there is life. Was everyone just kind of freaked out that there was a new possibility in a good
Yeah.
way?
Yes, yes. So along with having to learn how to live with Addison's, there was also a really big personality shift just with
Mm.
all of my hormones readjusting, and that was a very interesting time for my family. But one thing that made me kind of insecure was that, like, oh, this is so important that, like, I have to depend on other people sometimes to take care
Mhm.
of me. And I didn't like that. I still don't. I'm still an independent person. I like to do things myself. Um, but I think also in a way it did bring my family closer because here is something that they could do to help. And, they could look at me not feeling well and they could say, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need Cortef? Do you need salt?" Whatever it may be. Um, and yeah, it was kind of like there was a crazy adjustment period, but I think all of us were kind of acknowledging that, like, the family's still together. They still have their sister, they still have their daughter, and it was really special for sure.
I bet. That's anytime you go through any sort of medical chaos, it really brings out who's there for you and who's not. But we highlight
Yes.
we highlight those that are there, especially at such a young age, like to have your family have your back, set a really good foundation for your future.
Yes, absolutely.
So could you share, for those that aren't familiar and just to give us a bit more insight on your personal experience, you've touched a little bit on it, but like what were your primary symptoms with Cushing's, and then shift, what are your primary symptoms with Addison's now that you struggle with? Kind of like just to see where things are on the teeter-totter of feeling.
Yeah. So my main symptom of Cushing's that I hated the most was the headaches.
Mhm.
Headaches all the time. I couldn't function at all. And I remember at one point even commenting to my mom that, like, "Mom, I know that they don't know what to do with me. If all they can do is stop my headaches, I'll be happy."
Wow.
And then along with the headaches, I wasn't growing. I was actually getting shorter because the Cushing's weakened my bones and my muscles
Mhm.
in my back. And so my spine was like compressing against each other. I ended up getting compression fractures in my spine. Again, like very, just such major fatigue. It's like walking through cement every day. And I could sleep all day every day and still be exhausted. But at the same time, I had insomnia, so sometimes I couldn't sleep.
Mhm.
And then the appetite was a big concern, I think, for everybody. I remember one day in particular, like sitting down for dinner, eating a whole plate of spaghetti, and like still being hungry and eating a second whole plate of
Wow.
spaghetti. And I'm sitting there going, like, what's wrong with me? Like, I feel like I'm not supposed to be able to to eat this much, but I'm
Right.
just starving all the time.
Ugh.
And so I think the headaches combined with just the fatigue and the muscle weakness, those were my worst symptoms. And it's different for everybody, but those were the ones that I hated the most. Now with Addison's, really my only symptom that I feel on a pretty regular basis is fatigue, but it's not nearly as bad as it was with Cushing's. Like, I have a job, I'm decently social. I go out and hang out with friends or my boyfriend or whatever. Now, when I need more Cortef, then I get other symptoms such as headache, nausea, tremors, and stuff like that. But as far as like day-to-day symptoms, it's really just like mild fatigue.
Well, then one more comparison would be how frequent were your Cushing symptoms versus how frequent are your Addison symptoms?
My Cushing's symptoms were all the time. It
Wow.
was nonstop. All day, every day, I was sick. Now anymore, it's like intermittent fatigue. If I get any symptoms more than fatigue, such as the headache or the nausea or whatever, I mean that's maybe a couple times a month. I mean it's in my head, it's like almost not even
Yeah.
comparable. It's a night and day difference.
Well, when you're going from 24/7 around the clock symptoms to something that's popping in and out less frequently,
Yes.
there's a huge, especially when it's taking a physical toll on you and a mental and emotional toll so severely, that's going to be a huge difference.
Right. Yes, it
Oh,
is.
Okay, so now knowing what we're years later, obviously the surgery was necessary to keep you alive and to give you a quality of life. But now with what you know about Addison's and, what you know about Cushing's, what you've experienced about Cushing's, if you were in a position, this is a really weird hypothetical, but if you were in a position where, you have your Cushing's again and you know everything that's going to happen Addison's wise, what that disease is, would you, if you were given the choice, basically, is what I'm asking, to have the surgery, would you have made that choice? Would you
Oh,
make that choice?
yes, absolutely. With no hesitation. And I won't say that like it's not been hard. Like there's
Hmm.
a definite learning curve. Sometimes I look back at what I knew 15 years ago and I'm like, wow, I don't know how I survived. I did not know anything.
Yeah.
But I have learned so much more about my body and how to take care of it. And there are times like, right after an adrenal crisis, or like I'm in the emergency room, or like I'm explaining to my boyfriend, like, here's how you might have to save my life if I go into a crisis. That I kind of wonder, like, why did this happen to me?
Mm.
Is it even worth it? This feels so unfair. But then I just remind myself of the control that I got back. And, this is something that we've already mentioned a couple times, but I had absolutely no control with Cushing's.
Mm.
Cushing's was controlling my life. Cushing's was taking my life. And now with Addison's, it's, I have control. I can help myself feel better. I can help myself function well. I can build my own community of support who I know um, want what's best for me. And so just having that feeling of control, yes, I would have surgery again, absolutely, in a heartbeat.
Clearly, for your situation, it was necessary and gave you so much more than you and your family even knew possible at that point.
Yes.
And surgery might not be the best option for everyone. Obviously, everyone has different circumstances, there's different causes, there's different symptoms, there's other medical, conditions at play that are contributing factors. But, what is one thing that you'd like to share with others about Cushing's, or those with Cushing's who might be cautious about taking steps towards surgery?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple things that I would say. First, I just want to acknowledge like how crappy of a decision this is. It's like surgery or no surgery, or maybe you're also talking about medication or whatever, and you're kind of like, isn't there another option? Like, is this really like the cards that I've been handed? Do I really have to pick this? And I'm acknowledging how awful of a decision it is, especially if you have Cushing's and you're trading one disease for another. You're trading Cushing's for
Hmm.
Addison's, and that really sucks. But also on the flip side, life is going to be different, but it can still be good. And I have been able to experience so many things in my life that I wouldn't have been able to without surgery. Even just like becoming an adult, getting my driver's license,
Hmm.
moving out of my parents' house, being in a serious relationship. Even on the bad days, life can still be good. One of the most recent times that I was sick, I was laying in bed eating, I think, chicken noodle soup. My bottle of Cortez was next to me, and I was reading a book. And I could hear, in the other room, my roommates were talking and laughing. And it was just such like a peaceful moment that, like, yes, even though I'm sick, I'm stuck in bed, we're having to like monitor me more closely. It was still just like a really lovely moment and just like a soft moment. And life is often very, very hard. But sometimes, even in the midst of having a chronic illness, you still get glimpses of just like a really beautiful life that you wouldn't have had the chance to live otherwise.
One thing that always pops up for me that I always think of is these like gems, these moments of joy. I think when you've gone through, and obviously I have no idea what you've been through. I have my own experience with Addison's and other things, but like as another individual who's gone through a medical carousel or roller coaster, whatever you want to call it, you do gain this. I mean, yes, there are days, definitely. I can speak for myself that I'm very angry or very sad or very disappointed in the lack of my ability to do certain things or the type of things that I had to step away from because my body can't do them anymore. But there are these, you gain this like different appreciation for these little moments. You're talking about being in bed, drinking chicken noodle soup, low cortisol, maybe on the verge of a crisis, and you're listening to your friends enjoy their life, and you're having this moment of almost calm clarity, because it is like you do have this appreciation of like, wow, this, I'm so grateful I get to experience this despite all the obstacles along the way.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to reiterate just how important it is to find people who do love you and who do support you, because for a few years my support system was not good. I was in a very unsafe and an unstable environment, and my health was so bad and I was having pretty significant symptoms. I was kind of on the verge of a crisis all the time. And then, I got out of that situation. And it was with the help of some of my very closest friends that I kind of came to realize that, like, the reality is that this isn't me and this is my life. And I have Addison's. And I tend to think that I'm a burden on people and that I'm making other people's lives harder. But one of my friends said, maybe sharing your needs with us just helps us love you more. And maybe it actually makes it easier for us to support you when you say, hey, I'm not feeling well. Can you come over and spend time with me in case I go into a crisis? And that makes it easier to love you and to support you because we know what you need. And that has really shifted my mindset as far as, the community that I build,
Mhm.
because if you're not someone who is willing to sit there with me in the trenches, and if you're not willing to acknowledge that this is my life sometimes, then you're probably not the kind of person who I'm going to go to and say, hey, I need this support right now. Can you be here with me?
I first want to say, good friend, keep them
Yes.
around. We
Yes.
like them. That is such a beautiful sentiment, and it must have been so amazing and validating to hear from them. It's so hard. It is so hard, especially when you are a type A personality or an independent person. You want to do everything for yourself. You don't want to ask for help. This is so common in our community and just in people in general. It's hard to ask for help. But, I had a similar experience where I was like low cortisol crashing. This was like a year or two after my diagnosis, still didn't really understand everything, didn't like to ask for help. And it was like midnight, and my husband was out or out of town or something like that. But my best friend, who was like 8 months pregnant, came over with a gallon of ice cream and just laid with me in bed. And it was like the first realization where I was like, oh, it's okay. Like if she's willing to help me in her state, I felt guilty. I was like, I should be helping her. She shouldn't be driving. She should be like resting. And I just had this moment of like, oh, it's a shared, I don't even know what the right vocabulary word is. It's like, it's a shared experience of like, we just help each other. We lean on each other and it's okay. It doesn't make anything that's happening with our bodies or in our minds or in our environment. Everything is out of our control. All we can do is support each other here and there, because there's going to be times where we can offer support to those friends in return in a different way. I always say one of my favorite things, I have very kind friends who always ask if I have space to hold for them, if I have enough energy. I love that they ask that, but I also love holding space for them because it's something that I can almost always do. I may not be able to go for a hike. I might not be able to go, out. I'm not going to go out to dinner, but you want to call and tell me the hard stuff you're going through. I'm here. I will listen. That is something that I can do in return. And I think it's so nice when you find those friends that understand that reciprocation and that they can. Basically, what I'm saying is like, it is so valuable, you're right, to find that type of community, to stick with them and to help it flourish. And I think I want to say to those who are having a hard time finding that community, don't give up. They're definitely out there. That's one of the things I really love about NADF too, is the support groups. There's online virtual groups. There's so many different ways to connect to people who do understand what you're going through. But there are also people out there who maybe don't understand, but are willing to learn or listen.
Yes. Yes.
I would love to hear more if you're willing to share about all the advocacy work that you've done or the books that you've written, how what you've gone through has really set a foundation for so many other people in the chronic illness community.
Yeah, so my goal as I was writing these books was essentially write the book that I wish I had. And I feel not so much anymore, but I felt so alone all the time. Nobody could empathize with what I was going through. Nobody could say, "Hey, I understand." Because, I was in the medical books. Like, not even doctors had seen a case like mine. And so I wrote these books with the purpose of saying, you know what? There's somebody out there who maybe I haven't been exactly in their shoes before, but I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed. I know what it's like to feel confused. I know what it's like to feel like, your life is just spiraling out of control. I know what it's like to have to show up to doctor's appointments multiple times every single week. And I know what it's like to have to take medication in order to, function, in order to live. And so maybe I haven't been in your exact shoes before, but I can empathize with what you're feeling. And I can say that I have felt that before, and I can say that it does get better. So my first book is primarily about my journey with Cushing's and then Addison's. My second book is more about, I actually contracted bacterial meningitis in 2020, and that led to a whole slew of other health issues. Um, but my second book covers that and a lot more of the mental and emotional and like spiritual aspects of my journey. There's a lot more of like my inner thoughts that I share in that book. And then my third book is actually poetry. I process things by writing, and so I basically went through my little journal of poems that I would write, at 3 a.m. or whatever. And most of them are about, living in a body that's constantly changing, or living in a body that's different than you thought it was going to be, or feeling like you are a burden on other people, or life is hard, but maybe it's still beautiful. And so that's what my third book is it's just a lot of poetry that I think, people with rare diseases or chronic illnesses will be able to really relate to. And that's my goal, both with my books and also with any advocacy work that I do, is like, I just want people to know that they are heard. I know what it's like to be like yelling into the void that like, I don't feel good and nobody understands, and I'm just trying to like do this myself, but I'm overwhelmed and I'm sick and I can't function. And I just want to be that person for people who says, you know what, this does suck. This really sucks, and I'm so sorry you're in this position. And I will be here. I will sit here in this deep dark hole with you until you're able to get out.
And you are. And you do that for so many people. And I cannot overemphasize enough how important that is, how valued that is, how needed that is. Our community needs it. Our voices need to be elevated. So many of us have so much to say. And honestly, so many of us can't. We're too tired. It's too hard. There's too many obstacles. We're just trying to survive. So any chronic illness warrior that's doing it, 10 gold stars. I am the biggest fan. I'm so excited. Tell us where we can get all books, because we got to get them.
Yes, so 2 of them are available on Amazon. If you just search Wendy Moses, they should pop up. I also have a website. It's just wendymosesauthor.com, and you can order all of them there too.
We will. Well, is there anything else you want to say or close out, Wendy, before we end this chapter?
Just the last thing that I would say is, whoever is listening, whether you are an adrenal patient or a caregiver, or even just somebody who's curious, because I'm curious about a lot of things, I do encourage you to visit the NADF website. It's very practical. It's very helpful. And no, I wasn't paid to say this or anything. I have found NADF to be so helpful, and sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. So just going through some of them, learning how to be a good support person, learning how to take care of yourself, learning how to explain to other people what you're living with. I think just getting curious about other people's experiences is the first step to being able to help them.
I agree. Well, thank you, Wendy, so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your time and energy, your story, and for being so vulnerable and open with the world, so that way we all don't feel alone and we can learn from you.
Right, absolutely. You're welcome.
Thanks for being here, Adrenal Warriors. I'm your host, Vanessa O'Rourke, sending you all the spoons, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining in on another episode of All Things Adrenal. This episode is edited and produced by Magdalene Zinke. For more information on the National Adrenal Diseases Foundation, please visit nadf.us. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review to help others find out about all things adrenal. If you have a story you want to share or a question you'd like answered, reach out to NADF support at nadf.us.